On the wedding night of our commercial marriage, I knew my place and carried my blanket to the guest room to sleep. 2 minutes later, my furious CEO husband pushed the door open. "I'll give you 10 seconds to get back to the master bedroom." Wearing oversized slippers, I stood frozen in shock. I stood before the guest room door in the massive estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, my hands still trembling from the aftermath of the wedding reception that had ended less than 2 hours ago. Out in the courtyard, the decorative lights still blazed like a festival. The clinking of crystal glasses, the toasts, and the bursts of laughter still echoed in my head. My wedding didn't feel like a wedding. It felt like the launch of a corporate merger. I was merely a signed clause exchanged for the survival of my family's company. The bride was me. The groom was Carter Sterling, a man I had met exactly twice in a lawyer's conference room, with eyes as sharp as scalpel blades and a polite smile like a pane of cold glass. Everyone said I had hit the jackpot. They said my family's ship was sinking, yet we somehow managed to cling to the Sterling Enterprises ocean liner to survive. But I knew that liner wasn't a rescue boat. It was loaded with conditions, unspoken rules, and an abyss so deep it could swallow anyone who took a wrong step. I took a deep breath and turned the doorknob. I had decided from the very beginning that I would sleep in the guest room. In a commercial marriage, the only thing I could do was maintain proper distance, not trespassing into the space in his heart that already belonged to someone else. The master bedroom. That massive bed, I figured it should be reserved for Carter Sterling and the woman he carried in his heart. I didn't ask her name. I'd only heard rumors in the business world that he had an ex, a phantom who had never truly left his life. I had just spread my blanket on the guest bed, not even having the chance to sit down, when the door behind me burst open with a heavy thud like a hammer strike. I jumped, spinning around. Carter Sterling stood in the doorway, wearing a dark gray silk bathrobe, his collar slightly open, a drop of water from the shower still lingering on his jaw. He didn't step inside immediately, but his gaze alone was enough to make the narrow room feel suffocating. "Amelia Hayes, what are you doing in here?" His voice was cold, not a distant cold, but a biting cold that could slice through skin. I swallowed hard. I came here to sleep. Who gave you permission to sleep in the guest room?" He stepped forward, each footfall seemingly stepping right on my heartbeat. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that I was the one in debt, that I had to know my place and play the obedient daughter-in-law that wealthy families demanded. I forced a stiff smile. "Ours is a contract marriage. I know my boundaries, and I won't bother you. Don't worry." Carter looked as if he had just heard a joke. He let out a dry laugh and suddenly grabbed my wrist, his grip so strong it felt like my bones were being crushed. "Are you trying to remind me? Or are you just playing the saint?" My eyes watered from the pain. "No, I didn't mean that." He didn't let go. "I'll count to 3. Grab your blanket and get back to the master bedroom." I froze. Why? I was giving him space. I was avoiding trouble. I was opting out of a war that wasn't mine to fight. Yet he was furious, as if I had committed a crime. But before I could even open my mouth, he started counting. His deep, sharp tone left no room for negotiation. 1. I looked at my gripped wrist, the pain reminding me I had no right to choose. 2. I panicked. Carter Sterling wasn't the type to make empty threats. I didn't know what the consequences of 3 would be, but I knew for sure they wouldn't be pleasant. I hastily grabbed my blanket and practically fled the guest room, walking back to the master suite like a student sent to the principal's office. The master bedroom was so huge it felt empty, lit by soft ambient lighting, smelling of fresh mahogany and a faint trace of men's cologne. I threw my blanket onto the long velvet sofa by the window and curled up in the corner, trying to shrink myself, trying to become an unobtrusive decoration. Carter walked in after me, closed the door, and locked it. He looked at me on the sofa, his brow furrowing as if looking at an eyesore. "Who told you to sleep on the sofa?" I stammered. "Then, I'll put a mattress on the floor." His face darkened. He didn't answer. A second later, he strode over and scooped me up into his arms. I let out a soft gasp of panic, my arms reflexively wrapping around his neck. His chest was hot, his heartbeat drumming directly into my ear, making my face burn as if someone had splashed boiling water on me. He dropped me onto the bed, not gently, but not brutally either. Then he planted both hands on either side of me, his body hovering over mine, blocking all my escape routes. The distance was so close I could hear his breathing, smelling his cedar body wash mixed with the faint scent of champagne from the reception. "Listen to me," Carter said, every word as heavy as a hammered nail. "From this second on, you are Mrs. Sterling. You are the mistress of this house. This bed is split in two. You sleep on your side. Don't try to be clever and run around with your blanket. I don't want to see it." I was dumbfounded. This wasn't the script I had imagined. I thought he would ignore me, or worse, treat me like a pawn. But forcing me to sleep here, using words like mistress and Mrs. Sterling, felt almost like a declaration of ownership. I didn't know if it was kindness or just the cold principles of a man used to controlling everything. The next morning, I was awakened by the continuous buzzing of a cell phone. I opened my eyes and felt as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped over me. I was curled up in Carter's arms. His arm was wrapped around my waist like an iron bar, my face pressed against his warm chest, my ear catching his steady heartbeat. I was petrified. I had been awake almost all night from stress, yet in my sleep, I had unconsciously crawled against him. The phone kept vibrating. Carter opened his eyes too. His gaze was frighteningly alert, not at all like someone who had just woken up. He glanced down at the arm holding me and raised an eyebrow very slightly. I hastily tried to pull away. "Don't move," he said in a gravelly voice. Not only did he not let go, but he pulled me closer. He reached out to grab the phone from the nightstand. Looking at the screen, I clearly saw his expression change, growing as cold as gathering storm clouds. "Hello." The woman's voice on the other end was soft and thin, intentionally trembling. "Carter, I'm in so much pain. I heard you got married. Is it true? How could you?" I didn't need to hear her name to know who it was. A woman who had the right to call him by his first name early in the morning, who could cry, who could blame him, who could make his eyes waver in a single second. I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. But inside, I felt freezing cold, as if plunged into icy water. Carter remained silent for a beat, then said briefly, "Text me the address." He hung up, releasing the arm holding me. He got out of bed and dressed very quickly. I lay still, my eyes closed, but my heart felt like it was being squeezed. I heard the bedroom door open and close. In the massive room, there was only the sound of the central air conditioning filling the vast emptiness. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. My tears flowed on their own, hot and humiliating. I knew it. Last night on our wedding night, those words Mrs. Sterling, mistress of the house, sharing the bed might have just been a man's impulse or a control tactic. The person who truly softened his heart was still her. I wiped my tears, forcing myself to sit up. Even if it was just a contract, I had to play the part. I got dressed and went downstairs, where I saw a middle-aged woman sitting on the living room sofa, holding an espresso cup, scanning me from head to toe like a piece of merchandise. She was dressed in designer clothes, her jewelry sparkling, but her smile was as thin as a razor. "Up late, aren't we?" She set the cup down, her tone flat. "Now that you're in this house, relearn some manners. Don't think marrying Carter turns you into royalty." I lowered my head. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling." She chuckled softly, looking straight at me. "Don't call me Mom. I haven't accepted you. Remember clearly. You're here because of your family's company. Carter helped your family once. You'd best not dream for more. His heart already belongs to someone else." I clenched my fists, my nails digging painfully into my palms, but I didn't dare react. She stood up, adjusting her silk scarf. "Today is the post-wedding brunch at your parents' house. Tell Carter to take you properly. Don't let people say our family lacks manners." She walked away, the click of her heels on the marble floor sending shivers down my spine. I stood in the middle of the vast living room, feeling as though I had been dragged out of a dream and thrown straight into a gilded cage. The post-wedding brunch. I looked at the clock. It was 9 a.m. I wondered where Carter was right now. Did he remember today was the day I had to visit my parents, or was he too busy saving someone else? I sat down to wait. I tried to keep my back straight, acting like a proper Mrs. Sterling. But inside, a storm was brewing. It was a warning that things wouldn't be peaceful, wouldn't be simple. It was just a contract marriage, and whether I wanted to or not, I had already stepped into the vortex of Carter Sterling. I sat on the sofa in the Greenwich estate, my hands clasped tightly together. On the wall was a large antique brass clock. The minute hand ticked by slowly. Each tick felt like a knock against my chest. Jodan Shawufen. Jodan Sanchifen. Shurdan. I still sat there, back straight, trying to maintain the calm composure of a new bride, but inside I was a nervous wreck. Today was the traditional post-wedding family gathering. It wasn't a huge formal event, but it was a matter of pride for both families. My parents had been preparing since early morning. I knew my mom was probably cooking a massive feast. My dad had likely invited our closest relatives in Queens to come over. But Carter, he still wasn't back. I knew where he was, or more accurately, I could guess. The soft, wounded kitten voice from the early morning phone call echoed in my head. "Carter, I'm in so much pain." Just one sentence. And he had left the house immediately. I looked down at my hands. The diamond wedding band on my ring finger was dazzling, but strangely, I didn't feel any warmth from it. It felt more like a shackle. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Mom. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice came through, a bit anxious. "Amelia, honey, have you and Carter left yet? Your dad and your uncles are waiting." I looked out at the massive driveway. There was no sign of his familiar Maybach. I tried to keep my voice normal. "Yes. We're leaving soon, Mom. He had a minor emergency at the firm, so we're running a bit late." On the other end, Mom immediately said, "Oh, that's fine, honey. Work is important. Your dad says we can wait as long as needed." That sentence made my heart ache. My dad was a very proud man. But because the company was in debt, because of the massive investment Sterling Enterprises had just injected to save them, he was willing to lower himself to this extent. I hung up, a lump in my throat. At 10:30 a.m., the wrought iron gates finally opened. The familiar black Maybach pulled in. I stood up instinctively. Carter stepped out of the car. He was still wearing the suit from yesterday, but he had changed into a fresh dress shirt. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly messy, and he carried the faint scent of tobacco and a very light, feminine perfume. My heart stopped. He walked into the living room, furrowing his brow when he saw me still sitting there. "You haven't left?" I looked at him for a few seconds, then said softly, "Today is the family brunch." Carter froze. He clearly had just remembered. He glanced at his Rolex. "If we leave now, we'll make it for lunch." Just a simple sentence, but it felt like a knife slicing into my chest. No apologies, no explanation as to why he didn't call just, "We'll make it." He went upstairs to change. 10 minutes later, Carter came down in a completely new bespoke suit, his face returning to the familiar, cold expression of the CEO of Sterling Enterprises. He grabbed the car keys. "Let's go." I quietly followed him. For the entire drive from Connecticut down to Queens, New York, neither of us said a word. The Maybach glided down the highway like a silent black shark. The atmosphere in the car was so heavy I felt like I couldn't breathe. I looked out the window, trying to avoid my own reflection in the glass, because I was afraid to see what my face looked like right now. The car pulled up in front of my house. It was a modest, 2-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood, not luxurious, but clean and cozy. Many people were already waiting on the porch. My dad, my mom, a couple of uncles, and a few close neighbors. When the Maybach parked, all eyes turned to us. Carter stepped out first, instantly shifting his expression, putting on the flawless, polite smile of a successful businessman. My dad hurried forward. "Ah, Carter, it's been a while." Carter shook my dad's hand. "I apologize for being late, Arthur. There was an emergency at the office. Just that one sentence, and my dad smiled so wide his eyes crinkled. "No worries at all. Business is paramount." My mom pulled me aside, whispering, "Is Carter treating you well?" I looked at Carter, who was chatting with my dad. In his hands were expensive gift bags, high-end scotch, rare vintage wines, artisan truffles, all top-tier luxuries. The relatives standing around were in awe. So lucky. Amelia got herself a brilliant husband. What a catch. I smiled. Yes, he's very good to me. I couldn't say otherwise. Because my family's future rested in that man's hands. Lunch was lively. Carter became the center of attention at the table. My uncles kept pouring him drinks. "Carter, we hope you can guide our firm in the future. Amelia has been a sweet girl since she was little. Please take good care of her." Carter answered tactfully, not promising too much but not making anyone lose face either. He was like a professional actor playing the perfect son-in-law. Only I knew it was just an act. That afternoon, as we prepared to leave, my dad walked Carter all the way to the gate. "If Amelia is ever unreasonable, please be patient with her." Carter nodded slightly. "Don't worry, Dad." The word dad slipped out naturally, but I knew it was just polite nomenclature. The car pulled away from the suburban street. I turned to look back. My parents were still standing at the gate, waving until the car disappeared. My heart felt incredibly heavy. After driving for a while, Carter suddenly spoke. "Forget about last night." I turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" He kept his eyes on the road. The things I said, I understood. He was referring to what he said on our wedding night. "You are the mistress of this house." I let out a light chuckle. Okay, just one word. But inside, it felt like something had shattered. Perhaps from the beginning, I shouldn't have expected anything. This marriage was just a contract, nothing more, nothing less. If you are enjoying this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel to support us. We wish all our listeners health and peace. The Maybach drove smoothly, like gliding on water. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the trees along the highway retreated behind us. The afternoon traffic toward Connecticut was noisy and crowded. But inside the car, it was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. After Carter's command, "Forget about last night," we didn't speak another word. I understood his meaning. He wanted me to forget his words from the wedding night, to forget him pulling me onto the bed, declaring me the mistress of the house, to forget that he held me all night, forget it all. Just remember we were husband and wife on paper. That was it. The car stopped in front of the Sterling estate. Carter got out first. He didn't wait for me, nor did he look back. I slowly followed. Entering the living room, I saw my mother-in-law, Eleanor, sitting on the sofa reading a Vogue magazine. She looked up at us, her gaze lingering on me for a few seconds before shifting to Carter. "Done with the family visit?" Carter nodded. "Yes." She placed the magazine on the coffee table, her tone flat. "Must have been a joyous occasion over there." I couldn't tell if she was being genuine or sarcastic. Carter didn't answer her comment, merely stating briefly, "I'm going up to my study." He walked straight upstairs. I stood in the living room, feeling like a spare part. Eleanor looked at me for a moment, then said, I sat down opposite her. She poured a cup of Earl Grey and pushed it toward me. "Do you know why Carter agreed to marry you?" I subtly clenched my hands. "Yes, because of my father's company." She smiled faintly. "Correct. But that's not the only reason." I looked up. She met my gaze with utter calm. "Carter is a hard man to read, but I know my son. He's not the type to take a wife purely for a contract." I didn't know how to respond. She took a sip of tea and continued, "But don't overthink it. He still holds someone else in his heart." I lowered my head. "I understand." She nodded slightly. "Good. With that?" She stood up. I won't stop you from being a daughter-in-law in this house. But remember one thing." She paused at the foot of the stairs. "Don't hope for too much. The higher your hopes, the harder the fall." I sat in silence long after she disappeared. Those words were like a very thin blade, yet they cut incredibly deep. That evening, Carter didn't come down for dinner. I sat alone in the massive dining room. There were 6 gourmet dishes on the table, but I only managed a few bites. Thomas, the estate manager, stood nearby, looking slightly sympathetic. "Madam, please eat a little more." I smiled weakly. "It's all right, Thomas. I'm full." In truth, I wasn't full at all. I just had no appetite. Night fell quickly, and the sprawling mansion settled into a deep quiet. I went up to the master bedroom. The large bed was still half empty. I lay on the right side, the exact spot I had slept on our wedding night. The left side was Carter's, but he wasn't coming back tonight. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, eventually drifting off to sleep without realizing it. In the middle of the night, I was woken by the sound of the door opening. Carter was back, a faint scent of alcohol trailing in the air. He turned on the bedside lamp to its lowest setting, assuming I was asleep. I kept my eyes closed, pretending ignorance. He took off his suit jacket, untied his tie, and lay down on the other side of the bed. The distance between us was still like a river, so close, yet impossible to cross. I thought he was asleep, but a few minutes later, his phone vibrated, the screen's light illuminating his face. I cracked an eye open. The screen displayed the name, Chloe. He opened the message, and I clearly saw the text, "Carter, thank you for today. I feel much better because of you. Did you make it home?" A moment later, Carter typed back, "I'm home." The other side immediately replied, "Good night." Attached was a small heart emoji. Carter stared at the screen for a few seconds, then locked the phone without replying further. But what hurt me the most was the very faint smile at the corner of his lips at that moment. I turned my face the other way, forcing myself to go back to sleep. But inside, it felt like someone was stabbing me with a needle, one agonizing prick at a time. It turned out that even if I lay in the same bed with him, I still wasn't the person he thought of before falling asleep. In the days that followed, our lives became very strange. We lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, but barely spoke. Carter was incredibly busy. He left early in the morning and often didn't return until late at night. Sometimes, he came back very late, still carrying the scent of alcohol and women's perfume. I didn't ask. I had no right to ask. During the day, I usually went to my father's firm in Queens to help out. Even though Sterling Enterprises had injected capital to save the company, the situation remained dire. One afternoon, while I was reviewing ledgers in the accounting office, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice was shaking. "Amelia, where are you?" My chest tightened. "I'm at the office." "What's wrong, Mom?" My mom choked back a sob. "Your dad. He was beaten up." I shot to my feet. "What?" "He's at Mount Sinai Hospital. Get here fast." I practically ran out of the building. When I arrived at the hospital, I saw my dad lying in a bed, his head wrapped in white bandages, his arm in a cast. My mom sat beside him, her eyes red from crying. I asked, trembling, "What happened?" Mom wiped her tears. "It's the commercial lot in New Jersey that our firm just won the bid for." I instantly remembered it was our company's most crucial project right now. Mom continued through her hiccups. "Another corporation wanted that land. They came looking for trouble and assaulted your father." I clenched my fists. "Which corporation?" She whispered. "Vanguard Holdings." I froze. Vanguard Holdings was a massive real estate conglomerate. Rumor had it their CEO was ruthless, and no one dared cross him. I looked at my dad lying motionless on the bed, and only one thought remained in my head. The only person who could help us right now was Carter Sterling, but what right did I have to ask him? Our marriage was a transaction. He had saved my family's company once. How could I have the face to beg for more? I stood in the hospital corridor for a long time, eventually unlocking my phone. I tapped Carter's name, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the device. It rang for a long time before he finally picked up. His voice was cold and brief. "What is it?" I took a deep breath. "Carter. My dad was assaulted." The other end went silent for a few seconds. I recounted everything. Finally, I asked softly, "Can you help me?" The silence grew terrifying. Every passing second felt like an eternity. Just as I was on the brink of despair, Carter finally spoke. "Which hospital?" I immediately gave him the address. He only said one more sentence. "Wait for me," before hanging up. I stood silently in the hospital hallway, wondering where the decision I just made would take our marriage. I stood at the end of the corridor at Mount Sinai, my back against the cold wall. The pale fluorescent lights reflecting off the tile floor made everything look even more washed out. The strong smell of antiseptic made me slightly dizzy. But what suffocated me most wasn't the hospital smell. It was the overwhelming sense of helplessness. My dad was in the room behind that door. My mom was beside him, trying to wipe away her tears. And me? I could only stand here waiting for a man I probably shouldn't have bothered. I checked my phone. 20 minutes had passed since Carter said to wait. I didn't know if he was actually coming. Maybe he would. Maybe he got busy and forgot. After all, ours was just a contract marriage. I smiled bitterly. Just then, hurried footsteps echoed from the end of the hall. I looked up. Carter Sterling was striding toward me. He still wore his familiar dark tailored suit, his tall frame standing out amongst the crowd. Behind him were two assistants and a middle-aged man in a black suit. Within seconds, he was standing in front of me. His gaze swept over my face, stopping at my red, swollen eyes. He frowned slightly. "Where is your father?" His voice was still cold, but I detected a hint of urgency. I pointed toward the hospital room. Carter immediately walked in. My dad was lying on the bed, his head bandaged, his casted arm suspended. Upon seeing Carter, my dad tried to sit up. "Carter, why are you here?" Carter quickly stepped forward to support him. "Dad, please lie down," he said dad so naturally. My father was clearly surprised, but emotion instantly filled his eyes. Carter turned to the middle-aged man who came with him. "Dr. Evans, please take a look." The man nodded. He immediately re-examined my father's injuries. Only then did I realize that Carter hadn't just come himself. He had brought his private physician. 15 minutes later, Dr. Evans stepped out into the hallway. "The trauma isn't life-threatening, but he needs to rest for at least a month." I breathed a sigh of relief. Carter nodded. "Thank you, doctor." Dr. Evans left. The corridor fell quiet again. Carter leaned back against the wall, taking out a cigarette but not lighting it. He looked at me. "Vanguard Holdings did this." I nodded. "Yes." He was thoughtful for a few seconds, then asked a question that caught me off guard. "In your eyes, what is our marriage?" I froze, not understanding why he would ask that right now. I lowered my head. "It's a transaction." Carter let out a low chuckle, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Right." He stood up straight. "If it's a transaction, there must be a give and take." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" Carter stepped closer. The distance between us barely a foot. He placed a hand on the wall behind me, essentially trapping me in the corner of the hallway. His voice dropped low. "I will handle Vanguard Holdings for you." I knew he could. With the power of Sterling Enterprises, it wouldn't be too difficult. "But what do you want?" Carter looked straight into my eyes. His gaze was so deep I couldn't guess what he was thinking. After a long moment, he said slowly, "I want you to willingly be my wife." My heart skipped a beat. "I'm already your wife." Carter shook his head. "I don't mean on paper." He reached out, his cold fingers gently touching my cheek. "I want you to belong to me." I stiffened, not because the words were romantic, but because they sounded more like a command. Only one thought ran through my mind. Maybe he just wanted to see how low I would demean myself for my family. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, then opened them. "Okay." Carter clearly didn't expect me to answer so quickly. A flicker of surprise crossed his eyes. I said softly, "As long as you help my dad." "I agree." Carter stood perfectly still. After a while, he let out a soft breath. "Remember what you said today." He turned and walked away, his two assistants immediately following. I stood in the hallway for a long time, not understanding why my heart was racing so fast. 2 days later, everything changed so rapidly I couldn't react. The CEO of Vanguard Holdings, the man who ordered the hit on my dad, personally came to the hospital to apologize. He brought expensive fruit baskets, gifts, and a thick envelope of cash. Not only that, but he signed over the deed for the New Jersey lot back to our company. No conditions, no disputes. My parents looked at each other in disbelief, and I knew exactly who was behind it. That evening, I returned to the Greenwich estate. Carter was already home, sitting on the sofa watching the Bloomberg financial news. Seeing me enter, he turned off the TV, then patted the empty space beside him. "Come here." I walked over slowly and sat down. The distance between us was mere inches. Carter suddenly wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me into his lap. I went rigid. He leaned down, whispering in my ear, "Amelia, I've fulfilled my end of the bargain." His breath was burning hot against my ear. "Now it's your turn." My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I turned my head. Our lips were so close I could feel his breath. I knew what I was doing. I knew I was stepping onto a path of no return. But I closed my eyes and kissed him first. Carter's body instantly tensed. A second later, he gripped the back of my neck. The kiss deepened, becoming much more forceful, tasting of fine scotch, tobacco, and sheer possessiveness. I could barely breathe. When he finally let me go, my head was spinning. Carter stared at me for a long time, his eyes darkening. Moved to the left side of the bed, I was bewildered. "I'm already sleeping in the room." He shook his head. "I mean sleep right next to me." That night, for the first time, I slept less than a hand's width away from Carter. I didn't dare move. The scent of his body wash lingered in the air. In the dark room, Carter suddenly turned to face me. "Am I that terrifying?" I gave a tiny nod. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then a large, warm, firm hand grasped mine. "Go to sleep." I didn't know why, but that night was the first time since the wedding that I slept soundly. But I didn't know this peace would only last a few days, because someone was about to return a woman who could completely alter Carter. Her name was Chloe Vance. The following days passed strangely. My life at the Sterling estate seemed to have shifted, though it wasn't exactly clear in what direction. Carter was still as busy as ever, leaving early, sometimes returning late. But there was a noticeable difference. He started coming home more often. Gone were the nights he vanished entirely. Gone was the scent of strange perfume on his shirts. And notably, he started eating dinner at home. That evening, I was in the kitchen helping the maid set the dining table when I heard Carter's car pull into the driveway. Thomas, the manager, murmured, "Madam, Mr. Sterling is home." I stepped out into the living room. Carter, having just handed his suit jacket to Thomas, paused when he saw me standing by the stairs. "Have you eaten?" His voice was still deep, but no longer as icy. "I was just preparing to." He nodded. "Let's eat together." 2 simple words, but they made my heart flutter slightly. We sat opposite each other in the grand dining room. Soft, ambient light fell over the table, the hot food giving off a rich aroma. I took a bite of sea bass, suddenly realizing Carter was watching me. "Is something wrong?" I asked. He shook his head. "No," but his gaze didn't leave me. A moment later, he asked out of the blue, "How is your firm doing?" I was slightly taken aback. He had never asked about that before. "Better, thanks to the New Jersey project." Carter nodded and resumed eating. The conversation lapsed back into silence. But this time, the silence wasn't as oppressive. After dinner, Carter didn't go straight up to his study like usual. He sat in the living room watching financial news on the TV. I walked past, intending to go upstairs, when I heard him call out, "Amelia." I turned around. He patted the seat next to him. I hesitated for a few seconds before sitting down on the sofa. We were very close. Carter kept his eyes on the screen, but suddenly said, "Aren't you going to ask me?" "Ask what?" "About Chloe." That name made my heart skip a beat. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I have no right to ask." Carter turned off the TV. The room instantly fell silent. He turned to look at me. "You are my wife." I smiled faintly. "On paper." His eyes darkened. "Not just that." I didn't reply. Because in my heart, there was still a massive chasm. A chasm named Chloe. Right then, Carter's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and I clearly saw the caller ID. "Chloe." I immediately looked away. Carter hesitated for a few seconds before answering. "Chloe." His voice dropped. On the other end, the woman's voice sounded frail. "Carter, I just flew back to the States. I felt my heart sink to the floor. Can you meet me tonight?" Carter was silent. The silence stretched so long I could hear his every breath. Finally, he said, "I'm busy tonight." I turned to look at him. Chloe seemed very surprised. "Carter, I need to talk to you." Carter frowned. "Some other time." He hung up. I didn't know why, but a strange feeling blossomed in my chest, something like a tiny ray of hope. But that hope was quickly extinguished. Just 2 days later, that morning, I was getting ready to leave the house when I saw Carter standing at the bedroom door, fully dressed in his suit. He said, "I have plans tonight. I'll be home late." "Okay." We spoke like two strangers. That evening, I ate dinner alone. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened the attached photo. In the picture, Carter was sitting in a high-end Michelin-starred restaurant in Manhattan. Across from him was a woman in a white dress, long hair, beautiful face, Chloe. My heart tightened. The text below read, "You should know your place." I sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't hard to guess who sent it. Chloe. I looked at the photo again. They looked like the perfect couple, while I was just a wife on paper. Carter came home very late that night. When he entered the bedroom, I had already turned off the lights. But I clearly heard him changing. He lay down on the bed, very close to me. I turned my back to him. A while later, Carter suddenly asked, "You're awake?" I didn't answer. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then said, "I just went to see a friend tonight." I let out a soft laugh in the dark. "You don't need to explain anything to me." The room fell back into silence. But this time, the silence carried a very cold edge. Carter didn't say anything else, but that night, I felt his hand rest lightly on my waist, as if trying to hold me back. I just didn't know if that touch was out of habit or something else entirely. The next morning, I woke up very early. As I walked past Carter's study, I accidentally overheard him on the phone. His voice was freezing cold. "Chloe, don't pull stunts like this anymore." I stopped in my tracks. "Last night was just dinner. You had no right to send that photo to Amelia." My heart raced. Carter paused for a few seconds, then added a sentence that stunned me. "She is my wife." I stood frozen in the hallway for a long time. I didn't know why, but my mind was suddenly in turmoil. Maybe things between Carter and me weren't over, but I also didn't know what Chloe would do next. After that morning, an indescribable feeling took root in my heart. I had clearly heard Carter's words on the phone. "She is my wife." Just one sentence. But it was like a stone thrown into the still waters of my heart, sending ripples outward. Throughout the morning, I couldn't focus on work. Sitting in the small office at my dad's firm, I kept checking my phone unconsciously. I didn't know what I was waiting for. A text from Carter? Or another text from Chloe? Neither came. At noon, Mom brought lunch into my office. "Eat a little, honey. You haven't touched a thing all morning." I nodded. She watched me for a moment, then asked, "Are things okay between you and Carter?" The question made me pause. I didn't know how to answer. "Yeah, we're fine." Mom sighed softly. "Your dad says Carter is a good man." Don't overthink things. I smiled faintly, but my heart felt heavy. Was Carter a good man? Perhaps, but he was also a man I couldn't figure out. That afternoon, as I was getting ready to leave the office, my phone rang again. This time, an unknown number. I answered. Hello? A gentle female voice came through the line. Is this Amelia Hayes? My chest tightened. Yes. Who is this? The woman's voice was remarkably calm. I am Chloe Vance. I was silent for a few seconds. Even though I had guessed it, hearing her say it still sent a pang through my heart. Chloe continued. I want to meet you. I frowned. About what? About Carter. I didn't know why I agreed. Maybe because I had too many questions of my own. An hour later, I walked into an upscale cafe in the Upper East Side. Chloe was already seated at a window table. It was the first time I'd seen her up close. Chloe was beautiful not in a sharp, striking way, but with a fragile, gentle beauty that made people want to protect her. She wore a flowy white dress, her long hair cascading over her shoulders. Seeing me approach, she stood up and smiled. Amelia. I sat opposite her. The air between us was tense. Chloe stirred her latte gently and said, I'm sure you know who I am. I nodded. I know. She looked at me for a few seconds, her gaze perfectly calm. Do you know why Carter agreed to marry you? I was slightly taken aback. Because of my family's company. Chloe let out a soft laugh. Do you really believe that? I frowned. What do you mean? Chloe pulled out her phone, opened a photo, and slid it across the table. It was a picture taken 3 years ago. In the photo, I was standing outside a small coffee shop near my old workplace in Manhattan, holding a stray cat. I remembered that day vividly. It was raining. The cat was injured, and I had taken it to a vet. But what shocked me was why Chloe had this picture. I looked at her. Chloe smiled. Did you know? Carter started noticing you from that day? My heart began to pound. What are you talking about? Chloe shrugged. 3 years ago, Carter frequented that cafe for client meetings. He saw you that day. I didn't know whether to believe it or not. Chloe continued. From that day on, he started looking into you. I shook my head. Impossible. Chloe smiled faintly. Do you think Carter Sterling is the kind of man to easily marry a woman just for a contract? I didn't answer, because I had asked myself that very same question. Chloe looked me dead in the eye. He likes you. That sentence hit me like a blow to the chest. But Chloe paused. He likes you, but he doesn't love you. I clenched my hands under the table. What are you trying to say? Chloe smiled. I'm saying his heart still belongs to me. The atmosphere grew oppressive. Chloe tilted her head. Did you know I saved Carter's life 3 years ago? I froze. Saved his life? Chloe nodded. He was in a severe car accident. If I hadn't gotten him to the ER in time, he wouldn't be alive today. She looked at me, a hint of pride in her eyes. Because of that, I will always have a place in his heart. My throat felt dry. Chloe picked up her coffee, took a sip, and then delivered a soft line that stabbed me right in the heart. Amelia, do you think a man could ever forget the woman who saved his life? I didn't answer, because the answer was obvious. Chloe set her cup down. You are his contract wife, but I am the one he can never forget. She stood up and adjusted her designer bag. Before leaving, she added, Oh, right. Tomorrow night is the Sterling Enterprises charity gala. I've been invited. She gave me a slight smile. I hope to see you there. Chloe walked out of the cafe. I sat there for a long time, staring at the photo on the table. 3 years ago, a stray cat, a rainy day in New York. I never imagined someone was standing in the distance, watching me, remembering me until now. But what worried me more was the charity gala tomorrow. I had a feeling it wouldn't be just a simple party. I left the Upper East Side Cafe as dusk began to fall. The Manhattan streets were jammed with traffic, horns blaring, the yellow streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. But all that noise felt very far away. My mind was consumed by Chloe's words. He likes you, but he doesn't love you. I will always have a place in his heart. I walked slowly to my parked car, feeling as if a boulder was pressing down on my chest. 3 years ago, a stray cat in the rain, a man standing in the shadows watching me. If what Chloe said was true, then Carter knew me long before we got married. But if that was true, why had he never mentioned it? I drove back to the Greenwich estate in a daze. When I pulled up, Thomas was already there to open the door. "Welcome home, madam." I nodded. Walking into the living room, I saw Carter sitting on the sofa. He was in a crisp white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, a thick stack of documents on the coffee table. Hearing my footsteps, he looked up, his gaze lingering on my face for a few seconds. "Where did you go?" I hesitated. "I went out to meet a friend." Carter watched me for a few more seconds, as if trying to read my eyes, but ultimately just nodded. "Right." He didn't ask further. I stood there for a moment. A strange urge suddenly swelled inside me. "Carter." He looked up. "Yes?" I hesitated for a few seconds before asking, "Did we ever cross paths before we got married?" The question made Carter freeze. His eyes darkened for a split second, so fast that if I hadn't been paying close attention, I would have missed it. He closed the file in front of him. "Why do you ask?" I looked at him. "Just curious." Carter was silent for a few seconds, then said very calmly, "No." His answer made my heart sink. So either Chloe was lying, or Carter didn't want to tell me the truth. I didn't push it. I just nodded and headed upstairs. Behind me, Carter remained seated on the sofa. I could feel his gaze following me for a long time. I woke up quite late the next morning. When I went down to the dining room, Carter was already getting ready for work. He was standing by the door, adjusting his tie. Seeing me, he said, "There's a gala tonight." I nodded. Carter frowned slightly. "Who told you?" I looked at him for a second. I heard people talking. He paused. "Get ready to come with me." I was a bit surprised. "I have to go?" Carter raised an eyebrow. "You are my wife." Just one simple sentence, but I didn't know how to react. That afternoon, a stylist hired by Sterling Enterprises arrived at the estate. She brought racks of evening gowns. Glittering, luxurious dresses I had never imagined wearing. After nearly an hour of fittings, she finally selected a deep, navy blue gown. It hugged my figure, featured a slight off-the-shoulder neckline, and was both elegant and alluring. When I stepped out of the dressing room, Carter was waiting in the hallway. He looked at me, his gaze lingering a few seconds longer than normal. Then he said softly, "It'll do." Just those words. But for some reason, my heart beat a little faster. That evening, we arrived at the Plaza Hotel, the venue for the Sterling Enterprises Charity Gala. The ballroom was magnificent, adorned with massive crystal chandeliers. Dozens of business moguls and celebrities were in attendance. The moment Carter walked in, all eyes turned to him. Several people immediately approached to greet him. "Mr. Sterling, good evening." Carter nodded politely, but his hand rested lightly on the small of my back as a form of introduction. "This is my wife." I was a little taken aback hearing him say it. A few people looked at me with curious eyes. A middle-aged socialite laughed and said, "You kept her hidden so well, Carter, finally bringing your bride out to society." Carter just offered a faint smile. Right then, the ballroom doors opened again. I looked over, out of reflex. Chloe Vance walked in. She wore a long white evening gown, her hair cascading down her back. The chandelier light caught her perfectly. She looked like a movie star stepping onto a red carpet. Many people turned to stare. Chloe walked straight toward us. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. "Carter." Her Vodafone. Her voice was soft. Carter gave a curt nod. "Chloe." Chloe turned to me. "Amelia." I offered a polite, social smile. "Hello." The air between the three of us became incredibly strange. Chloe chuckled softly. "Carter and I go way back." She looked at him with profound intimacy. "I assume you already know." Before I could answer, a waiter walked past. Chloe suddenly stumbled, and the glass of red wine in her hand spilled directly onto my dress. The dark red wine bloomed across the navy blue silk. Gasps erupted from the surrounding crowd. Chloe hastily gasped, "Oh my God, I am so sorry." But there was not an ounce of genuine apology in her eyes. I stood perfectly still for a few seconds, suddenly realizing the truth. Chloe had no intention of playing nice. She was initiating a war. And tonight's gala was only the beginning. The red wine soaked into my navy blue gown, spreading rapidly like a slashed wound laid bare in front of a crowd. The ballroom fell dead silent for a few seconds. Every pair of eyes was glued to me and Chloe. Chloe covered her mouth, her face a mask of regret, but a flicker of triumph danced in her eyes. "Oh, I am truly so sorry, Amelia." My hand slipped. Her voice was soft, but every word was calculated. I looked down at the expensive silk absorbing the stain. I understood immediately. This wasn't an accident. This was a performance. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Such a gorgeous dress ruined. Wonder if it was on purpose. Chloe took a half step closer, lowering her voice so only we could hear. "See? In places like this, one little slip and you lose all your dignity." I looked up, meeting her eyes directly. I felt surprisingly calm, but before I could speak, a warm hand clamped onto my shoulder. Carter stepped forward. He looked at the wine stain, his eyes instantly turning to ice. "What happened?" Chloe immediately changed her expression, her voice trembling weakly. "Carter." My hand slipped. "I swear I didn't mean to." Carter ignored her. He stripped off his custom tuxedo jacket and gently draped it over my shoulders to cover the stain. Then he turned to Chloe, his gaze steady but so freezing it made the air hard to breathe. "Your hand slipped." Chloe nodded, her voice quivering. "I really didn't mean it." Carter stared at her for a few seconds, then said slowly, "If your hands are that slippery, it's best you don't hold a glass next time." The entire ballroom went dead silent. Chloe stood frozen. She clearly hadn't expected Carter to humiliate her like that in front of New York's elite. Glances were exchanged. Perceptions shifted instantly. I looked at Carter. His gaze softened when he looked back at me. "Go change." I gave a small nod. He led me out of the ballroom, straight toward the VIP lounge. As soon as the door clicked shut, I let out a breath. Carter looked at me. "Are you all right?" I shook my head. "I'm fine." He was silent for a moment before saying, "Chloe did it on purpose." I was slightly surprised he was so blunt. "I know." Carter looked at me, his eyes dark and deep. "Next time something like this happens." He paused. "You don't have to hold back." I let out a soft laugh. In a crowded room like that, what could I possibly do? Carter stared at me for a long time before saying, "You have me." Just 3 words, but they made my heart flutter wildly. After changing into a backup dress, I returned to the ballroom with Carter. Chloe had vanished from the crowd. The gala continued as if nothing had happened, but the way people looked at me had changed. Some were curious, some respectful, some jealous. When we finally returned to the Greenwich estate that night, it was nearly 11 p.m. I kicked off my heels and stepped into the living room, only to hear Carter call my name. "Amelia." I turned around. "Yes?" He was standing by the window, the ambient light casting shadows across his face, making him look even more stoic than usual. "I spoke with Chloe." I froze. "What did you say?" Carter looked at me. "I told her not to seek you out anymore." My heart sped up. "Did she agree?" Carter smiled faintly. "No." He took a step toward me, "But she understands the warning." I looked at him, speechless. After a long moment, I finally spoke. "Carter." He met my eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." I hesitated for a few seconds. "Did you really never meet me before we got married?" Carter's eyes locked up for a fraction of a second, but he quickly regained his composure. "Why do you keep asking that?" I shook my head. "Never mind." He stared at me a few seconds longer but didn't press the issue. I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep. Chloe's words from the cafe kept echoing in my head. 3 years ago, a girl feeding a stray cat. A man standing in the shadows watching. I rolled over and saw that Carter wasn't asleep either. He was staring at the ceiling. "You're still awake?" He turned to look at me. "So are you." We lay in silence for a while. Then, very softly, he said, "Amelia." "Yeah? Do you believe in fate?" I thought for a moment. "I don't know." Carter looked at me, his eyes so deep I couldn't decipher them. Some things aren't just coincidences. Before I could ask what he meant, he rolled over. "Go to sleep." I stared at his back for a long time, a very strange feeling blooming inside me. It seemed there was still something he hadn't told me. Before we conclude this part, please allow me a brief moment. If you find this story compelling and want to hear what happens next, please like and subscribe to our channel to support us. Wishing all our listeners health and peace. The story still held many buried secrets, and I didn't yet realize that the true storm was about to hit. Following the gala, Carter and my life seemed to return to a normal rhythm. But I knew that subtle, unnameable ripples had begun to form in my heart. Chloe's words were like a tiny splinter lodged in my chest, not agonizingly painful, but impossible to ignore. The next morning, Carter left for the office very early. I woke up when the sunlight was already streaming through the large windows, casting warm pools of light on the hardwood floor. The side of the bed next to me was empty, holding only the familiar scent of his cologne on the pillow. I went downstairs to the dining room where Thomas was preparing breakfast. "Madam, you're awake." I nodded, taking a seat. "Did Mr. Sterling leave early?" "Yes. He had a crucial board meeting today." I ate in silence, but my mind kept drifting back to his cryptic words from the night before. Some things aren't just coincidences. What did Carter mean by that? Before I could ponder further, my cell phone rang. It was my mother. The moment I answered, her frantic voice came through. "Amelia, where are you?" I startled. "I'm at the house." "What's wrong, Mom?" My mother paused for a few seconds, then whispered, "Your father is in the hospital." I jumped to my feet. "What?" "He was assaulted." "By who? Who else?" "Vanguard Holdings." I understood immediately. My family's company had just secured a bid for a lucrative commercial lot in New Jersey. But that lot was exactly what Vanguard Holdings had been eyeing. Vanguard was notorious in the real estate world for operating like mobsters. I clenched my fist. "Did you call the cops?" Mom shook her head. "Yes, but they said it's hard to prove." I stood there for a long time. Only one thought in my mind. I knew who could solve this, but I wasn't sure if I should ask him. My marriage to Carter was just an arrangement. He had already bailed out my family financially. What right did I have to demand more? But picturing my dad in a hospital bed, I knew I couldn't just stand by. I walked out to the hallway and dialed Carter's number. It rang 3 times before he picked up. "Hello!" His voice was deep and steady, as usual. "Carter!" I choked up before I could get the words out. He went silent for a few seconds. "What happened?" I took a deep breath and recounted the whole situation. The line went dead silent. The silence stretched so long I started regretting the call. Just as I was about to say, "Never mind," Carter spoke. "Which hospital?" I gave him the address. He simply said, "Stay there and wait for me." About 40 minutes later, Carter appeared in the hospital corridor. He was in a black suit, flanked by 2 assistants. The moment he arrived, the atmosphere shifted. My mom stood up instantly. "Carter." Carter gave a polite nod. "Is Arthur inside?" I led him into the room. Seeing Carter, my dad tried to sit up. "Mr. Sterling." Carter walked over. "Please, Dad, lie back down." He inspected the bandages on my father's head, his eyes turning frigid. He turned to me. "Let's step outside." We walked into the hallway. Carter leaned against the wall, pulling out a cigarette but not lighting it. "Vanguard Holdings men." I nodded. "Yes." He looked at me for a few seconds. "The man pulling the strings is Richard Thorne." I gave a small nod. I knew Richard Thorne was a ruthless figure in the corporate world. No one wanted to cross him. Carter looked at me for a long time before asking a question that made me freeze. Amelia, what do you think our marriage is? I didn't understand why he was asking this now, but I answered honestly. A transaction. Carter let out a low laugh, though it was impossible to tell if he was amused or bitter. If it's a transaction, there must be a give and take. He stepped closer to me. You want my help? I looked at him. Yes. He leaned down, his voice a low rumble. Then what are you offering in return? I stiffened. After a long moment, I asked, What do you want? Carter looked straight into my eyes, his gaze so profound it made my heart race. I want you to willingly be my wife. I was stunned. We are already married. He shook his head. Not on paper. He reached out and gently touched my cheek. I want you to choose to be by my side. My heart pounded so hard it almost hurt. What kind of demand was this? I didn't understand. But I knew one thing. My father was lying in a hospital bed, and I had no right to refuse. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, then whispered, Okay. Carter looked at me, a very strange emotion flashing in his eyes. He stood up straight. Remember what you said today. He then turned to his assistant. Contact Richard Thorne. Just one simple sentence. But I knew the storm had begun, and from that moment on, my marriage with Carter entered an entirely different phase. After leaving the hospital that day, Carter didn't say another word about Richard Thorne, but I knew he had already mobilized. Just 2 days later, news swept through Wall Street. Vanguard Holdings was suddenly hit with a massive, comprehensive SEC and tax audit. Several of their construction sites were shut down due to permit violations, and their stock plummeted. Insiders knew exactly what this was. This was no coincidence. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of Carter's office at Sterling Enterprises, looking down at the bustling Manhattan traffic, still in shock. Since that day, Carter had brought me to work with him, officially as his assistant, but practically just to keep me in his line of sight. On my first day at Sterling HQ, I felt the curious stares of countless employees. Staff lining the hallways greeted us while sneaking peeks at me. I heard whispers. That's the CEO's wife. I heard it was a corporate merger marriage, but he treats her like gold. I pretended not to hear, but stepping into the CEO's suite still made me nervous. Carter was sitting behind his massive desk. He looked up at me. Sit. I looked at a smaller desk set up barely 6 feet from his. Is this my spot? He nodded. From now on, you work here. I was surprised. But I don't know how to do any of this. Carter chuckled softly. If you don't know, learn. He stood up, walked over, and dropped a thick stack of binders on my desk. Read these first. I stared at the massive pile of documents, my head spinning. Are these project contracts? Yes, I sighed. Carter, I only studied finance. I know nothing about project management. He leaned against my desk, crossing his arms. If you don't know, ask. But ask who? Carter pointed at himself. Ask me. I stared at him for a second, then laughed. You're the CEO. You don't have time to tutor a trainee. He looked at me, his expression suddenly completely serious. I have time for you. Just those few words, but they made my heart melt a little. Over the following days, I gradually got used to the corporate grind. Carter literally taught me step by step. Sometimes he was in a meeting, and I'd text him a question. He would reply instantly. Sometimes I'd struggle with a contract clause, and he'd pull up a chair next to mine to explain it. The distance between us began to shift. One afternoon, while I was reviewing financial reports, Carter's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and I accidentally saw the name pop up. Chloe. Carter frowned. He didn't pick up. The phone buzzed again, and again. Finally, he powered it off. I pretended to keep reading my files, but an uncomfortable knot formed in my stomach. Chloe. I thought she'd vanished after the gala, but I was clearly too naive. That evening, as we were packing up to leave, His executive secretary rushed in. "Mr. Sterling, someone is here to see you." Carter frowned. "Who?" "Miss Chloe Vance." I looked up at Carter. He stood perfectly still for a few seconds before saying, "Send her in." Within minutes, the office door opened. Chloe walked in. She wore a simple black dress today, looking more exhausted than usual. But when she saw me sitting next to Carter, her eyes turned ice cold. "Carter." Her voice trembled slightly. Carter remained in his chair. "What is it?" Chloe stared at him for a few seconds. "Did you have to go that far?" I knew instantly she was talking about Vanguard Holdings. Carter didn't answer. Chloe took a step closer. "Do you realize how furious Richard Thorne is right now?" Carter smiled coldly. "I don't care." Chloe bit her lip. "You're doing this for her." She turned to look at me, her gaze sharp as a knife. I said nothing. Carter stood up. "Chloe!" His voice was freezing. "That's enough." Chloe gave a bitter laugh. "You're really going to war with Richard Thorne over a woman you just met?" Carter looked her dead in the eye. "You're wrong." He pulled me to my feet, his hand gently squeezing mine. "This isn't a woman I just met. This is my wife." The room went dead silent. Chloe stared at us. Her eyes were a mix of agony and sheer hatred. After a long moment, she let out a cold laugh. "Fine." She turned and walked to the door. Before leaving, she paused. "Carter!" He didn't reply. Chloe whispered, "You'll regret this." The door slammed shut, leaving the office in heavy silence. I turned to Carter. "Is she right?" He looked at me. "About what?" "Richard Thorne isn't going to let this go." Carter was quiet for a few seconds, then said very calmly, "He doesn't have the guts." I looked at him, still feeling a lingering sense of dread. For some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm hadn't hit yet, and when it did, it might change everything forever. Following that confrontation with Chloe in the office, the atmosphere between me and Carter shifted. It wasn't cold, but rather a very strange quietness. That night, as we drove back to the Greenwich estate, Carter drove in silence. The streetlights flashed through the windows, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across his face. I sat next to him, wanting to ask a dozen questions but ultimately swallowing them down. Just as the car pulled up to the estate gates, I unbuckled my seatbelt, and Carter finally spoke. "Amelia." I turned to him. "Yeah?" He kept his eyes looking straight ahead, hands resting on the steering wheel. "Are you scared?" The sudden question threw me off. "Scared of what?" "Richard Thorne." I stayed silent for a few seconds. If I said I wasn't scared, I'd be lying. The man was notorious for his ruthless tactics in the corporate world. More than a few people had been driven to bankruptcy by him. But looking at Carter, I shook my head. No. He turned to me, his eyes incredibly deep. "Why?" I gave a small smile. "Because you said he wouldn't dare." Carter stared at me for a long time, then let out a low laugh. "You trust me that much?" I shrugged. "I guess so." He didn't say anything else, but as we walked into the house, I noticed he held my hand tighter than usual. The days that followed were relatively peaceful. I continued working at Sterling Enterprises. At first, people gossiped behind my back, but eventually, they got used to my presence in the CEO's office. Carter stopped keeping his distance. Sometimes he openly brought me into high-level executive meetings. One morning, as I was reading a report, a secretary brought in coffee. She set my cup down and whispered with a smile, "Mrs. Sterling, the CEO has changed so much lately." I looked up. "Changed?" The secretary nodded. "He used to be so cold. Nobody dared make small talk with him." She smiled wider. "But since you arrived, he smiles a lot more." I felt my cheeks heat up. "Really?" "Really." She glanced toward Carter's desk. "I think he really, truly cares for you." I looked over at Carter. He was deeply focused on his documents, his expression as serious as ever. But for some reason, the secretary's words made my heart skip a beat. At noon, as we were getting ready to go grab lunch, Carter's phone vibrated. He checked the screen and frowned. "What is it?" His voice suddenly dropped to sub-zero temperatures. I couldn't hear the person on the other end, but I watched the color drain from Carter's face, his expression darkening rapidly. "I know," he said curtly, and hung up. I asked, "What's wrong?" Carter was silent for a few seconds before saying, "Your dad is being harassed at his office." My chest tightened. "Richard Thorne." He nodded. "Yes." I jumped up. "We have to go there." Carter looked at me. "Stay calm." He put a hand on my shoulder, his gaze unwavering. "I told you, I will handle this." We rushed out of the building. An hour later, the Maybach pulled up to my family's company headquarters in Queens. A crowd had already gathered outside. A group of heavily tattooed men were blocking the main entrance. The moment I got out of the car, I heard my mother arguing with them. "You can't come in here," a burly man sneered. "We're just here to collect what's ours." I sprinted forward. "Mom!" She turned, her eyes a mix of relief and panic. "Amelia! Don't come over here!" But I was already standing in front of the thugs. "What do you want?" The leader looked me up and down. "Who are you?" Before I could answer, a cold, deep voice echoed from behind me. "She is my wife." Everyone turned around. Carter stepped out of the car. He wore his black suit, his eyes as sharp as daggers. The atmosphere instantly became suffocating. The thug recognized him, and his face paled slightly. Mr. Sterling." Carter walked right up to him. "Tell Richard Thorne." His voice was terrifyingly calm. "If he wants to play games, he plays with me. Don't touch her family." The man stood in stunned silence for a few seconds before nodding. "Got it," he signaled his crew. Within minutes, the group cleared out. The company parking lot fell silent. My mother looked at Carter with overwhelming gratitude. "Carter, thank you." Carter just nodded slightly, but I saw his eyes. They were colder than ever. I knew the war between Carter Sterling and Richard Thorne had officially begun, and this time, there was no turning back. After Thorne's men retreated, the lot outside my dad's company finally grew quiet, but the dread in my stomach remained. The crowd dispersed. Mom let out a shaky breath, while Dad sat in his office, still in shock. I turned to look at Carter. He stood there, his expression calm but razor-sharp. It seemed what had just happened was nothing more than a minor nuisance to him. "Let's head back," he said. I nodded. But before getting in the car, I glanced back at the company gates one last time. I had a gut feeling this wasn't going to end so easily. On the drive back to Manhattan, Carter didn't say much. He focused on driving, his face more pensive than usual. I sat beside him, my mind racing. Finally, I asked, "Are you really not worried?" Carter shot me a glance. "Worried about what?" "Richard Thorne." He let out a cold chuckle. "He's not the type to fight head-on." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Carter spoke slowly. "He'll use a different angle." Hearing that made my anxiety spike even higher. That night, just as we arrived back at the Greenwich estate, Carter's phone vibrated again. He checked it and frowned. "What is it?" I didn't hear what was said, but his face progressively darkened. "I'll be right there." He hung up. I asked, "What's going on?" Carter looked at me for a few seconds. "There's an issue at the firm. Stay home and rest." I immediately shook my head. "No." He frowned. "Amelia, I'm going with you." Carter stared at me for a few seconds, then finally sighed. "Fine." Half an hour later, we arrived at the Sterling Enterprises skyscraper. The entire executive floor was lit up. The senior leadership team was already assembled in the main boardroom. When I walked in, everyone stood up to greet Carter. The tension in the room was palpable. The CFO spoke first. "Mr. Sterling, the permits for the Horizon Hudson project were just revoked." I gasped. The Horizon Hudson project was Sterling Enterprises' biggest development of the year. If that project was halted, the financial blow would be catastrophic. Carter took his seat at the head of the table. He didn't look surprised. "The reasoning? The City Planning Commission claims there are irregularities in our legal filings," another executive chimed in. "But we double-checked everything. There are no errors. I realized instantly. Richard Thorne. Everyone in the room looked at me. Carter gave a curt nod. Correct, an executive said in frustration. Mr. Sterling. If this continues, we'll be backed into a corner. Carter sat in silence for a few seconds, then said perfectly calmly, then we don't let him continue. That sentence silenced the room. I looked at him, a very strange feeling rising in my chest. The man sitting before me wasn't just a successful CEO. He was a man accustomed to navigating through hurricanes. The meeting lasted until almost midnight. After everyone left, only Carter and I remained in the boardroom. I looked at him. What are you going to do? Carter stood by the window, looking out over the sleeping city. He turned back to me. Richard Thorne wants to drag us underwater. I'll drown him first. His tone was level, but I knew a real war had just started. The next few days were more intense than ever. News of the Horizon Hudson project's suspension spread like wildfire through Wall Street. Analysts began questioning Sterling Enterprises' stability. The stock price started to dip. I watched Carter work almost nonstop. One night, he only slept for 2 hours. Late one evening, I walked into his home study. He was still at his computer, the glow of the monitor casting harsh shadows over his exhausted face. I set a mug of black coffee on his desk. You should get some rest. Carter looked up at me. He smiled faintly. Worried about me? I felt a bit shy. You're just working too much. He looked at me for a few seconds, then said softly, Amelia, yeah? What if I lose? The question caught me off guard. I never thought Carter Sterling would utter those words. I looked him straight in the eyes. You won't lose. Carter laughed softly. You have that much faith in me? I nodded. Yes. He stared at me for a long time. Then he whispered, Then I definitely can't lose. At that moment, I didn't realize the biggest storm had yet to arrive. And just a few days later, an incident occurred that shattered everything. 3 days after that tense board meeting, the pressure bearing down on Carter and Sterling Enterprises was visceral. Negative headlines dominated the financial news. Horizon Hudson project flagged for violations. Sterling Enterprises faces imminent crisis. I knew those articles didn't just appear out of nowhere. Someone was pulling the strings, and that someone was undoubtedly Richard Thorne. That morning, I was reviewing documents in the office when my phone rang. It was my mother. The second I answered, her trembling voice pierced my ear. Amelia, where are you? I startled. I'm at the office. Mom, what's wrong? My mother took a ragged, shaky breath, as if trying to hold herself together. Your father. He's missing. I shot up from my chair, the heavy seat crashing backward. What did you say? He went out a few hours ago to meet a client and never came back. His cell goes straight to voicemail. Panic seized me. I'm coming right now. 10 minutes later, I burst into the executive conference room. Carter was in the middle of a meeting with several VPs. I was hyperventilating. Carter, my dad is missing. The room fell dead silent. Carter stood up immediately. The meeting was over. He pulled me out into the hallway. When did this happen? I repeated what my mom had just told me. Carter didn't say a word for a few seconds. His eyes went dark, his mind clearly racing. Finally, he murmured a single name. Thorne. I looked at him. You think it's him? Carter nodded. He's trying to force my hand. My heart pounded so hard it physically hurt. What do we do? Carter stared at me for a long moment before saying, First, we find out where your father is. We left the building immediately. In the car, Carter made rapid-fire phone calls. His voice was cold and commanding. I need all traffic cam footage near Arthur Hayes' office. Check every vehicle leaving the area since this morning. Ping the last known location of his cell. Watching him in that moment, I truly understood why the business world both respected and feared him. He was terrifyingly calm. 2 hours later, Carter's head of security called back. They found the footage. My dad's car had been intercepted on a quiet industrial road in Queens. He was dragged into an unmarked SUV. I gripped my phone. Do they know where they took him? The security chief replied. Looks like an abandoned warehouse district out in Red Hook, Brooklyn. Carter hung up. He turned to me. Amelia, yeah? Stay here. I immediately shook my head. No. It's too dangerous. I'm going with you. Carter stared at me for a long time, finally letting out a sigh. Fine. An hour later, our SUV pulled up to a massive, derelict shipping warehouse in Red Hook. The surrounding area was pitch black, illuminated only by a few flickering sodium lights. I stepped out of the car, my heart hammering against my ribs, feeling like it might explode. The rusted warehouse doors slid open. A man stood inside. I recognized him instantly. Richard Thorne. He looked to be in his late 50s, wearing a sharp, dark suit, looking as relaxed as if he were waiting for a casual lunch meeting. Mr. Sterling, he drawled. Carter stepped forward. What do you want? Thorne sneered. You're a smart businessman, Carter. Why ask stupid questions? He clapped his hands. Two thugs dragged my father out from the shadows. His hands were bound. His face was chalky white. Dad! I lunged forward, but Carter threw an arm out, holding me back. Thorne looked at me, his eyes icy. Arthur's daughter? He smirked. Pretty. I clenched my fists. What do you want? Thorne turned his attention to Carter, the Horizon Hudson project. Carter said nothing. Thorne continued. You pull out of the project. Transfer full developmental rights to Vanguard. In exchange, I let him go. The air grew suffocatingly heavy. I looked at Carter. I knew exactly how vital the Horizon project was to Sterling Enterprises. Losing it meant an incalculable financial blow. Thorne watched us with sheer amusement. Make a choice, Carter. Money. Or a life. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. But before I could utter a word, Carter spoke. Done. I froze. Carter. He glanced at me, his face a mask of total calm. It's fine. Thorne burst out laughing. Mr. Sterling, a reasonable man as always. He signaled to his men. They immediately cut my dad's bindings. But just as my dad took a few steps forward, Thorne dropped a line that froze us all in place. Oh, right, forgot to mention. I'm taking the Horizon project. He shifted his gaze to me. But I want her, too. In that exact fraction of a second, Carter's eyes turned lethal. I had never seen him look like that, like a savage beast whose most vulnerable spot had just been struck. And I knew, right then, that everything was about to spiral entirely out of control. The moment Thorne uttered those words, the air in the warehouse practically flash froze. But I want her, too. He looked at me with cold, calculating eyes, assessing me like a high-value asset. A shiver ran violently down my spine. But what scared me more was Carter's expression. I had never seen him like this. The light vanished from his eyes, plunging into an absolute freezing darkness that seemed to drop the ambient temperature by 10 degrees. He took a slow step forward. What did you just say? His voice was a low growl, every syllable dropping like a lead weight. Thorne let out a dry laugh. Did I stutter? He began to casually pace around us, like a victor savoring his spoils. I'm taking the Horizon project. But Arthur's daughter. He looked me up and down. She looks like an entertaining bonus. My dad, having just been untied, screamed, You son of a bitch! You've gone too far! But the two thugs immediately slammed him back into a pillar. I looked at Carter. His hands were clenched so tight his knuckles were bone white. He closed the distance between him and Thorne until they were mere feet apart. You're crossing a line, Thorne smirked. A line? He shrugged. In our world, Carter, there are no lines. I could feel the tension ratcheting up to a breaking point. One spark and the whole place would blow. And right on cue, the wail of police sirens pierced the night air from the distance. Thorne flinched. Carter gave a dark, chilling smile. Did you really think I came to Brooklyn alone? Thorne stared at him for a few hard seconds before bursting into laughter. Well played, he signaled to his crew. Let them go. The thugs released my father. Carter pulled me firmly behind his back. Minutes later, half a dozen NYPD cruisers skidded to a halt outside the warehouse. Armed officers swarmed in. Thorne stood there, looking completely unfazed. He looked at Carter. This game is far from over. He turned and walked away. His lawyers already dialing numbers as his crew dispersed. The police could only secure the scene and take preliminary statements. But I knew perfectly well that a man with Thorne's resources wasn't going down for a simple standoff without hard evidence. When the chaos settled, the adrenaline crashed, and I realized my entire body was shaking. Carter turned to me. "Are you okay?" I nodded, but tears began streaming down my face involuntarily. Maybe it was the sheer terror or the crushing stress finally breaking me. He looked at me for a few seconds before suddenly pulling me into his chest. His embrace was crushing. I could hear his heart hammering against his ribs. "It's over. You're safe," he whispered, so softly only I could hear. In that fleeting moment, a realization hit me like a freight train. This man was truly, completely protecting me. After getting my dad home safely to Queens, we drove back to the Greenwich estate. It was past 2 a.m. I walked into the living room feeling as though every ounce of energy had been drained from my bones. Carter followed behind me. "I'll get you some water. Drink." I took the glass, my hands still trembling slightly. "Thank you." Carter looked at me for a long time before saying something that stunned me. "I'm sorry." I looked up. "For what?" He was quiet for a moment. "For dragging you into this." I shook my head. "It's not your fault." A long silence stretched between us. Finally, I asked, "The Horizon Hudson project. Are you really letting him take it?" Carter gave a faint smile. "Do you think I'd give it up that easily?" I was confused. "But back there, you." He cut me off. I was stalling. He stepped closer to me, the harshness leaving his eyes. "Amelia." "Yeah? I told you." "I will end this game." I looked at him, and a very strange, profound feeling welled up inside me. Gone was the suspicion. Gone was the transactional nature of our marriage. What remained was a genuine, undeniable connection between two people. At that moment, I didn't realize that we were only one step away from all the secrets of this story coming to light, and I was finally about to get the answer to the question that had haunted me from the very beginning. Did Carter Sterling really know me before all of this? After that night in the warehouse, everything seemed to irrevocably change, not just in the corporate war between Carter and Thorne, but in the very fabric of my relationship with Carter. The next morning, I woke up just before 8 a.m. The Connecticut sun streamed through the massive windows, casting warm, golden pools of light across the bedroom floor. I went downstairs to the dining room. Carter was already sitting at the table. In front of him was a black espresso, and a full breakfast had been set out for me. Seeing me, he looked up. "You're awake." I nodded. "Yeah." The air between us was quiet, but entirely stripped of the awkwardness that used to define it. I sat down across from him. After a moment, I asked, "How is my dad?" "He's fine." Carter took a sip of his espresso. "I've placed a private security detail on him." I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Thank you." He looked at me, his gaze dropping slightly. "Amelia." "Yeah?" "Last night, you asked me a question." My mind immediately flashed to the question that had followed me through this entire ordeal. Did we ever cross paths before we got married? I looked at him. "Yeah." Carter was silent for a few seconds. He set his espresso cup down. "Yes." I froze. "Really?" He nodded. 3 years ago. My heart started beating faster. He continued. "At a coffee shop near your old office in Manhattan, my mind instantly flooded with the memory of that rainy afternoon. A stray, injured cat, a girl crouching under the awning of a cafe." I looked up at him in shock. "You saw me that day." Carter smiled faintly. "I did more than just see you." He stood up and walked over to the tall windows. I remember it very clearly. I walked over to stand beside him. "Then why didn't you ever say anything?" Carter turned to look at me. His eyes were softer than I had ever seen them, completely stripping away the cold, ruthless CEO persona. Because back then, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. I was speechless. He continued. Until your father came to my office, begging for an investment. My eyes widened. So you knew who I was before you agreed to the marriage. Carter nodded. Yes. I stood there, stunned. So this marriage, he cut me off, was never just a transaction. I looked at him. In his eyes, there was a depth of emotion I had never witnessed before. He spoke slowly, deliberately. I wanted to see if we could truly become husband and wife. My heart hammered in my chest. All the doubts, all the insecurities I had harbored over the past months suddenly had an answer. I whispered, "What about Chloe?" Carter sighed. She saved my life once. Yes, but that's all it was. He looked directly into my soul. The person I actually want to keep by my side is you. Before I could even process the weight of his words, his phone buzzed. Carter glanced at the screen and frowned. He answered it. After a few brief, clipped responses, he hung up. I asked, "What happened?" Carter smiled a real, genuine smile. "Good news! Richard Thorne has been arrested." I gasped. "How? Did the NYPD find evidence of the kidnapping?" He shrugged casually. "The feds found his offshore accounts and wire fraud evidence. I just pointed them in the right direction." I burst out laughing. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a profound sense of relief washed over me. The war was finally over. In the days that followed, our lives settled into a genuine, peaceful rhythm. The Horizon Hudson project resumed operations flawlessly. My family's company stabilized and began to thrive again. One afternoon, I stood on the balcony of the Greenwich estate, looking out over the manicured gardens. Carter stepped out behind me. He placed his hands gently on my shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" I smiled softly. "Just thinking that everything feels like a dream." He tilted his head, looking at my profile. "A good dream or a bad dream?" I thought for a moment before answering. "It started out a little like a nightmare, but it has a pretty beautiful ending." Carter laughed. He reached down and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "Then let's keep living this dream together." I looked up at him. This time, I didn't hesitate. I nodded, because I finally knew the truth. A marriage that began as a cold, calculated contract had, against all odds, blossomed into a true, undeniable love story. Through this story, we can see that in life and marriage, things that begin out of necessity or circumstance can eventually evolve into genuine love when people learn to trust, to protect, and to place another person at the center of their lives. Any storm can be weathered. This story also reminds us that sincerity, courage, and true love possess the power to alter destiny and bring lasting happiness. We hope that after listening to this story, you walk away with positive values to make your life more joyful, peaceful, and happy every single day.